Okay guys, I'm going to apply the Glaze medium and Dove Gray. So I've got that put out on my palette. I'm going to take a sponge, just my yellow blending sponge, pick up my Glaze medium, and then pick up my Dove Gray. You could go Dove Gray, Sand Gray, any of those light colors you'd like. So I'm going to take that, I mix it, and I'm going to start and I'm going to apply from side to side. What you're doing is basically staining it, and the Glaze medium is going to raise the grain up, and we're going to do a light sand after it's dry. So I apply this light soft gray stain on here. You always, like I say, go the direction of the grain of wood. You can add more paint or more glaze according to how strong you want your color to be. I'm looking for something nice and soft for this piece because I want the design to stand out nice off of it. I'm going to need a bit more Glaze medium. And again, from side to side. You try not to, you try to go from side to side. Don't do halfway down like this and then halfway down like that, because what's going to happen, I'm going to get a bit more paint too. So what's going to happen if you do that is you're going to end up having stop and start marks with your stain. Glaze medium paint. There we go. Want it to be relatively uniform. I like to still see my green through. I like the look of the wood grain, so. And a lot of times I'll take Glaze medium and I'll go through after with either a wrecked brush or a stiff brush and go in and get the paint down into the grooves of this board. You want to make sure when you're doing that if you do get any over the edge, that you wipe it back at the same time. All right, so we're going to let this dry and we're going to sand it. Okay guys, so what I'm going to do now, I've got this done with my first glaze of the Dove Gray. I've let it dry, I've sanded it. Now I'm going to take my sponge, pick up more Glaze medium, and I'm going to pick up Cobblestone. It's going to be a couple shades darker. Pat that in on the palette. And then I'm going to start at the top, and I'm not going to hit everywhere. I'm just going to bring in a little here and there. Glaze medium, Cobblestone, pat. Once you run out of paint on your sponge, you can actually all go back into where you did your first blending. So I'm just going to hit and miss here, back and forth. Try not to curve the direction at all. See, I can go back right on the palette and pick up more. Get in. And it just gives it a little more of a weathered look. I like that. There. What I like about doing this is when I go to put my when I go to put my colors on, it helps if I want them not to pop off the board so much. If the background's really, really light, my colors are going to appear too strong. So this way, if I have a multitude of different shades, I could go in there with a bit of raw umber and even have a little tiny bit deeper, or even charcoal gray would be nice too, a little deeper strokes in there. But I'm good with this right now. I'm just going to leave it like that. All right, so we have just a little bit of a weathered, beachy kind of look for the background. and we should be good to go. Okay, we have our pattern transferred on, and now I'm going to start to apply the washes. Pardon me. So what I like to do is to take water from my brush basin and put it on my palette. Then I'm going to touch into the paint and stir it in. And you stir until you don't see any more little pigments floating around. I can go for a little tiny stronger. It's a lot easier to make a wash like this than to try to add water to the paint. You always end up having your washes too thick and too heavy. So I've got it all thinned down, and I've got enough to do quite a few of my leaves. But what I like to do first is I start and I just touch my paper towel just to take the excess off of my brush. So that way when I apply my wash to my leaves, it's not going to pool. Now this piece that I have, it has got those little crevices in there, so I will apply it into there as well. So you try to use as big a brush as you can. I'm using a number 10 or a 3/8, and I just blot. And when you're doing a leaf, if you tend to pull the direction from the outer edges inwards, if you do get any marks from overlapping, they'll actually be going the proper direction. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to complete all of my leaves. First with this color, and then I'm going to go ahead and do washes in the other colors that are all listed. Nothing is any different. You're going to do all of your washes the same way, and you're going to do them the same strength. We want to have all of the washes the same strength. You don't want to have, if one's a little darker, you're not going to notice, but if you have too much paint in your brush, in your wash, pardon me, what your shading is not going to be as effective. So this is very, very pale, and a lot of people think, oh, that can't be right, it's too sheer. This is lots of color on here. And you try to go right out to your shading lines, or your transfer lines, pardon me, because what's going to happen, I'm going to just pull a line with the chisel of my brush for the stems. What's going to happen is we're going to be shading, we're going to do loose outlinings, so you're not too concerned about seeing your lines through. So if you're worried that, well, I can still see my transfer lines. That's why I don't press too hard when I'm transferring as well. If you press really hard or you use a really fresh transfer paper, I like to tend to keep ones that have gone through the mill and use them for this kind of thing. So, okay, I went over my edge there, but I'm not concerned. Only because you saw it. Okay, so I'm going to go like so. So I'll do the leaves on the other side now, and then I'll carry on with... Okay, so I've applied the washes to all of the colors. Washes to all of the colors. Washes to all of the flowers and leaves and the bird. And what I want you to see is that they're very transparent. They have a bit of color, but it's not too much. The bird is done in the moon yellow. Under his tail you see the graphite. On the tail, the markings I've left white. I've put warm white. And then the wing is done in black, and the top of the head is in black. The black, you want to be very careful when you're doing it that you don't overpower it. It's important to keep. Okay, a couple things we want to do before we get going with our shading. I'm going to take my eraser and I'm just going to erase all the outer lines that are going to be standing out for you when you shade. what we're going to do is that we're going to shade nice and soft, so we don't want to have strong lines showing through. Now once you've erased all of the lines that you have, I'm going to leave the lines that are in between the petals so I can tell where they are. Now I'm going to take just a piece of tracing paper, and I'm going to nice and softly sand. It's not that these stick out much, but every time you add like a stain wash on top of here, it raises the grain a little bit. So I'm just going to take that and lightly sand over top of the piece. I can erase the end of his beak as well. So we're going to start by shading on our leaves. You can add a little drop of water, if you like, to your color there. So I'm just going to, just so it's thinned a little bit. Nothing like a wash by any means, but just a little thin bit. So when I shade, I'll shade nice and soft, and I want to walk it out. Now, for the leaves, I'm only going to shade down one side to start with, because I want to walk it out nice and far, and I don't want to be wiping out what I've done. So if you just choose one side, lean to the water part of your brush when you're walking it out. Nice and soft. So you see how you're getting that nice shadow on there? Now I still have a lot of moisture in the brush, so I just want to pick up a bit more paint right now. And walk it out nice and far. Now you can use whatever size brush feels comfortable for you. Lean to the water side, pull it over. And I'll just slide a little down my stem just to get the strength on those as well. So I'll continue with all of the leaves, doing the one side, and then I'll come back and shade the other side. Once my washes are all dry, I've gone in and I've added a little moon yellow wash for the throat on the pansies. Okay, so what we're going to do here, I shaded the first two petals and flowers so that you can see where we're going with this. Now, I have mixed for the lighter purple flower that we did with the purple petal in the wash, I've mixed grape juice and purple petal 1 to 1. Now I'm going to side load. You can use a 1/2 inch or a 3/8, whichever you feel more comfortable with. I like to use a large brush, but a lot of people are more comfortable. So I'm just going to shade, paint up, water down for the back petal, walking it in nice and far. To walk it in, you lean to the water part of the brush, lifting gently as you go the paint part up, going up onto that corner. Side load, blend. The secret is to blend nice and strong. Keep blending, blending, blending till you can see your colors floating on the brush. Come up here and strengthen that one a bit more. Hold till the shine disappears. Side load, blend, blend, blend. So we've got that nice soft purple on that flower. Now I was playing around with it and I mixed a little bit of it here just to see. I put a little blue in it, just testing it out, just to kind of change the colors a wee bit. This one I'm going to leave just with the purple. So now the second one, this is the one we did with the periwinkle wash. Now periwinkle's a purple blue, so we're mixing, I'm kind of going into the blue for this one. So what I've done is I've taken my periwinkle and I put a little bit of Royal Navy into it, like a little. So it's like 4 parts periwinkle, 1 part of the Royal Navy. So when you're doing that, it's always good to put out pea sizes beside each other, like 4 pea sizes of periwinkle, 1 pea size of the Royal Navy, and then stir them together. Don't pour them on top of each other and try to guess. It helps to make your mixes a little more accurate. So again, I'm going to shade nice and soft along the top edge. I like to use as big a brush as I can for the area so that I don't have to work so hard walking my colors out. And you can see how the lines are nice and faint still that I had transferred on. If you had your lines really, really strong, now I still have moisture in my brush, so I'm not wetting it again. You'll learn how to tell if you still have moisture in your brush. You can feel when you're shading if it sort of starts to drag and you're not able to walk it out nice and far. The faux squirrel brushes hold enough moisture and they're quite nice. All right. So we've got the bottom of that petal to do still. Slide my brush in on the side so I'm not pressing with the corner and getting the paint across the brush further than I want. And I don't press hard when I'm shading, nice and soft. Nice and soft, and just gently walk that color up. And that's good for me for now. Oops, there's one more guy over here. There's a little one of the buds. The buds we're just going to shade along the edge, strengthening up our color. I like the way I've got a little bit of the blue into that one, just to tint it a bit. You can play with your colors. The pansies are really, really pretty with all the brilliant colors in them. And we're going to tint some of our leaves later on in these colors. All right, so that's good for that step. So for the second shading on the flowers, we're going to start with just royal purple and a side load. Blend nice and strong. And then I'm just going to float and strengthen up the color on the ends of the petals. I'm not going to walk this one in as far as I did with the other. And if you're floating a shadow on a flower or petal, if you lift your brush as you float like this, do you see how my brush leaves a little line coming down? It kind of adds, it's not a wiggle if you're thinking of a double load kind of thing and wiggle your brush in, but it leaves that little, you see here, as I lift, it leaves that little line coming in, and that's kind of sweet on there. We're going to add a few little lines like that with our liner. I'm going to come in and add a little dark shadow for underneath where this flower is laying on top of the other. So what we're also going to do on this is I'm going to take and go back with dioxazine purple and strengthen a few spots in the purples afterwards, but I haven't done that yet. Now I'll allow that to dry up while I go ahead and I take the Royal Navy and I float Royal Navy, and Royal Navy is so pretty. See how it's nice and soft paint to the outside. I'm not pressing hard. I never press hard when I shade. Nice and soft. Almost patting it on. You see how pretty that color is and how it's really popping up and pulling the blue, kind of mixing that purpley blue in there. And I like to flip my brush around so I'm using the color from both sides of my brush. And you can kind of make, see how I can make a little bit of a jagged edge to the petal just by bringing my floated color out a bit further. This one's pretty smooth. I'll give it a wiggle. The pansy has such nice ruffled petals and they overlap each other. And soft, and we just float those colors in there. Flip the brush around, coming back this way. Now this line here where it kind of went out and it grabbed in my grain a little bit and bled out isn't really a big issue. I did touch it back up for you, but we're going to loosely outline, so that's an easy way to take care of any of those spots. So there. So now I can go back on the purple ones that I was talking about, and I can use the dioxazine purple. Now, actually, I'm going to switch to a smaller brush. I just want to kind of tint a few places here and there. Hold my brush till the shine disappears. Slide it in on the side and blend, blend, blend. So now I'm going to come in a few places here. I don't want to do it's not a second shading everywhere. It's a strengthening up. So I'm just picking a few spots here and there. Possibly look for more places that have a wiggle in them. I like to enhance those spots a little bit because it makes it look like so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my liner, and I've added a little water here to thin down some of my Royal Navy. And I'm going to loosely outline my petals. What I mean by loosely is if I outline here and I'm a little off, that's good. It just adds to the whimsical look of it. I do not want it to be a thick, and I'm pulling a few veins down. I don't want to have a thick, traced looking outline. If it's skinnier in another area and fatter somewhere else, that's good. It just adds to the look of the picture. Thin your brush. You can give it a little twirl on the palette if you want, so that it thins down the point, so that you're not having pardon me, thick paint or lots of loose watery paint running off your brush. It'll bring it back down to the point. So we're just, like I say, I'm going to outline. You can see how as I'm outlining, I can clean up any of those areas that I feel like maybe I caused a bleed going out there, too much shading or something. I can kind of correct that a little bit with my lining. And I'm never really concerned about it. I'm going to bring in a little bit of a nice shadow around the outer edge, smudgy kind of shadow. And I always find that that takes care of a lot of that. So that's with my blue. That's with our Royal Navy. And I tend to like to make heavier lines, or wherever I've got the paint really dark here, where it appears that the petal curls. If you put a few extra lines there, it enhances that look. Some places skip, don't get any lines, that's all good. So now I'm going to switch for the purple ones, and I'm going to go to dioxazine purple. Thin down, nice and inky. And I'll pull in some little fine lines again. Just keep my outline loose. It's kind of more of a hit and miss. And on these boards where I've got these, that would have caused an issue. On these boards where I have these ridges where I'm kind of scooting across, sometimes it makes it a little difficult. Just don't worry about that. Your eye can only look at one place at a time. So now if you feel like, oh, I wish I had had a little darker here and there, you can strengthen up your floating. You can dry brush in some. We're going to dry brush in some highlights. You can strengthen up your shading with that as well. So, and I'm going to tint on some of my flowers after. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a small flat, 1/4 inch, or a 6, and I'm going to float to strengthen up that little yellow center that we have in the flower. So I'm using cadmium yellow, and I strengthen that up. So that just pops right out now. We're going to be using soft black. And I'm going to be using a little bit of bleached sand. And these steps that we're going to do here, I'm going to take soft black with my liner. Again, a little water, thin it down, nice and inky. Too thin, you don't see it. Not thin enough. Or too thin, it bleeds too. Now you might have the little lines that you can still see there, just as a reference in your transfer. And you're going to just use your liner and bring in that little bit of a face that we have on our pansy. Uneven. So what I'm meaning by uneven is that I'm pulling the lines from different spots. You see that I'm not starting at the straight line. I want it to be uneven and jagged there. And I don't want them to stop at the same place. I pull the odd one a little bit longer. You're not concerned at having everything the same. And this part here, I want it nice and strong in the very middle of it. And you see that I'm changing the direction, right? I'm pulling it so that it fans out, basically. One can tend to be stronger than the other. Doesn't really matter. This pulls our flowers together because they're the same colors on everything. I love pansies. My mom loved pansies. They have videos of me as a baby crawling around, pulling the pansies out and eating them out of her gardens. So all of these nice little fine lines are going to emphasize and pull your eyes back into the center of that pansy. You see how it changes them. And if you feel like you had shaded too much in the center or not enough, this again changes the look of that. So you can see that your eye is drawn more to the center of the pansy than to the outer edges. This strong, deep color pulls it in. And remember, what's important is that you fan it out, that it's coming out the direction. So I'm going to come in here and strengthen this guy up a bit more. Right in the middle. Nice and fine lines. Always when you're using the liner, you have it standing straight up. With your other brushes, you tilt them like you do a pencil. This one's a lot of fun here, where he's right over top of the... Kind of have to treat it as two steps here. But yeah, you use your liner standing straight up and down. That's really, really important. It's always, you always have more control over it if you're pulling towards yourself. So if you feel like when you're doing this guy here, if it feels awkward to you, turn your piece so that you're working, pulling towards yourself. You might like that a bit better. I'm going to take my liner and I'm going to pick up a bit of that cadmium yellow and just pull a few stronger lines as well. I'm not filling it in. I just want to have a couple nice bold yellow lines in there. Pop that up. And now I'm going into the bleach sand. So I'm going to take bleach sand, my brush, press down and pull, and I'm going to put that little mustache, everybody calls that the little mustache on the pansy. So we'll just apply that with the bleach sand, brush on the tip, press, pull and lift off. Put my brush down, press, pull and lift off. I'm wanting to give it that inside of the petal. It's drawing your eyes in there even more. Okay, so that's good for that right now. Okay, so we're going to start our shading on the bird. And what we're going to start with is your 3/8 and cadmium yellow. So I'm going to side load cadmium yellow, walking it out nice and far. When you have a big piece such as the bird, what I mean by big pieces, like big areas where you're not reaching the other side of a petal, you'll really notice the wash base coat that's in here, and we're wanting that. We're wanting to keep it nice and soft. So I'm just going to shade nice and soft, walk it in, and pardon me, I'll let that dry up a bit. And while I'm letting that dry so I can go back in and shade in other areas of it, I'll go to his beak. So I'm going to switch to my 1/4 inch, and I'm going to side load into the dried clay. And I will nice and softly shade on the beak. Just blot it with my finger there. I don't want it to be too bold. The bottom of the bird's underbelly was done in graphite, so I'm going to shade in graphite. So I've side loaded, and I'll just fade it off into my yellow there. Use my little built-in blender and just pat that in a bit. A little stronger there. Now I'm going to actually shade in black, and this is really overpowering, or it can be really overpowering. So you want to make sure that you don't get too crazy with it. I'm going to blend well on my palette and nice and softly shade. He's got a little tiny bit of white on the end of his tail, so I'm just going to make sure that I just shade next to that. I'm not going to shade on it. If you don't blend enough on your palette, your black will come out like a trim rather than a shadow. So I'm side loading again in black. Blend it out well on your palette. And I'm going to shade up under the feathers. Just slide my brush. That just kind of gives the appearance that there are some feathers on him. And I'll just slide it up a little like so. So do you see how it kind of implied there's a little bit of feathering on the end there. I'm going to side load again. And I'm going to shade and I'm just sliding it up as I shade. It's almost like using your brush on the side and chiseling it up there. And above this white here, so you see I'm working my way up. I just set my brush down and I'm shading and sliding it up. While that dries a little bit, I can go back and shade a bit stronger on the top of the head. I'm going to shade a little bit on that eyeball. So you see how even though it's black, I missed a little bit in the top of the beak, so I'm just going to go back in there. Right here, you can see, get a little closer in here. There we go. Gonna shade a little bit. To put a crease in the beak. Now his beak looks really bright, and it is quite bright. I'm going to strengthen up, but we're going to be shading with a little tiny bit of soft black after. That's going to tone it. I just want to strengthen my graphite shading underneath the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to take back onto the bird. I've let it dry enough that I can take my cadmium again. And I can shade above the white. So I'm still ending up seeing my moon yellow wash in the middle of them. It's not all completely being covered up. And I want to strengthen our bird up a little bit, so I'm going to use antique gold. So you see how when I'm shading that antique gold, I'm kind of pulled it around a little bit just to create a bit of a cheek and then the back to the bird. Bring the antique gold up there. I'm going to dry brush a bit of the moon yellow back on the center afterwards when he's nice and dry. And that is going to really bring out the softness to the yellow. A little at a time, you can strengthen up some of your feather marks. So I'll just kind of come in here with the black and just strengthen shading those. I would rather strengthen those a little at a time than put it on and feel like that it's overpowered and then it's not looking like a nice stain anymore. I'll bring a little of that black into the graphite. I'm going to turn it a little bit. So I can strengthen the round on the top of his head. Now the sections that we have the white on, I'm going to side load again with my smaller brush, 1/4 or a 1/6. See how I can kind of just side load and float to strengthen up those white sections. And we had a little white up here that's kind of gotten lost. And then we had that bit of white on the end of his tail. But those little bits of white, and they're different on every bird. So if you look up these pictures of these birds, you'll see. So if you feel like, oh, I have more, or it's no big deal. Really no big deal. So I'm going to take my little bit of soft black, side load, and I'm going to shade his beak just to strengthen up his beak. Let that sit a bit. I'm even going to take a little bit of antique gold, little tiny bit of the soft black, and just kind of mix that together just to dirty it up a wee bit, and I can strengthen my shading. And of course I shouldn't be mixing with my brush, but you know. So I'm going to side load into that. It's hard to get it when you've made a little mix on the palette like that. And I'm going to just strengthen up a little on the underside belly of the bird, a little under the beak. It just gives a little bit more shadow there. And I'm just gonna, I call this like pat shading. Side loaded, start with your paint towards the back and your water out. Works pretty good for birds. Now I'm going to bring a little bit of black and again on that eyeball. I'm going to slide a little bit of black just here to make it appear that you're seeing a bit of that wing going around the back side. It just gives them a little bit of depth. Wanted to darken that, and I might get a little bit carried away. Strengthen that a bit with the soft black. Now I'll be able to come through the middle of his beak. And a little on the top of the beak. Now I'm going to shade the back side of his eye. If you're really nervous about doing shading on a washed little eyeball like this, you can just paint your eyeball all black if you'd prefer. And I'm going to take and just put a little tiny white highlight on that side of the eye. Nothing big. I'm going to pull a few little lines with the white in my liner. Not much. And I'll go back with a couple of black too. But you see, if you pull a few little lines, it just adds a little bit to the ends of those feathers. Nothing bold. It should be just, you see them or you don't kind of thing. Now I'm going to take my liner and I'm going to come back and I'm going to kind of outline our black sections on the bird. And when I do my loose outline along the bottom, I'm again going to pull some lines up like I did with the white. And this can crisp up your edges if you happen to get a little bit of a bleed through anywhere. You can kind of crisp it up a wee bit. I'm going to take some of the antique gold that I darkened with the soft black with my liner and just kind of pull a few little lines down here and loosely outline the front of the bird. It's not much. I can add a few little lines here. You're not looking to have anything bold. And then I've got my moon yellow. I've got my moon yellow. I don't need much. I'm going to take my lunar blender. So I'm taking a dry 1/4 lunar blender. Pick up some moon yellow. Scuff it off on my paper towel in a dry spot. And I'm going to dry brush. A little up on the head. And I'll put some down on the belly. And you can see that that just nice and softly pops up some highlight there. I don't want it to overpower it or anything, so just a nice little highlight. I'm going to do a little bit of a highlight of that. I just want a little light something on the top of the beak. That works. The bottom of the beak, I think, could still take a little bit more shadow, so I'm gonna take that soft black and shade the bottom. I'm going to shade a soft little bit there next to him too. When you do these extra little tiny soft floats like that, it's when you don't have hardly anything left on your brush. And that just, see how that's just adding just that little tiny bit of dimension to it. And if I want a little more highlight on the top of his beak, I'm going to take my dried clay and take a little tiny bit of warm white and mix it into that dried clay, just with my liner. I'll just pick up the two and brush mix it. Just add a tiny little swipe there. It's not much. There. Now, there's a couple things left to do back on our flowers, and I want to show you how in our leaves. So I'm going to take some plantation pine, side load some plantation pine, and I'm going to strengthen up the base of my leaves, and then just the odd spot. Maybe you want to do up the vein. But the base of the leaves is the good spot. Walk it up a bit. Bottoms of those little bud holder honors. Or the calyx. When I used to demonstrate all the time, people would say, "What's the calyx?" So I was better with the bud holder honors. Everybody knew where I was talking about. So I'm going in here and I'm strengthening up my leaves. So once I've got them all strengthened up, I'm going to take and I'm going to add some tints. So if I go into dioxazine purple, blend it out. I don't want tons. I'll tint maybe a wee bit, just a soft float on that leaf. And then maybe I'll come in and I'm going to add a little dioxazine purple tint, real soft, on these blue pansies. And it's just going to pull our whole picture together. I'm not completely reshading by any means. I'm just tinting. So tinting is when you're adding a little of one color onto something else that's in your photo, in your picture, pardon me. So I love to tint my leaves. I always think that that just pulls everything together nicely. And stay on the leaf is the best tip. And let's put a little on the opposite side here. Now, you don't have to tint every leaf. I've been known to get carried away. And now I'm going to take the blue, so I've got my Royal Navy. I'm going to add a tint on my purple pansies. Take my mop and soften that one. That was a bit bold. But again, you're not You're not doing everywhere. And I'll put some of that blue on a couple of leaves. So I'm tinting blue on my purple pansies. And purple on my blue pansies. Nice and soft. And that does tint and pull everything nicely together. I'm going to take and I'm going to thin down. And I'm going to add some curlies in my green. So I've just taken some of the green with the, this is the plantation pine with a tiny little bit. I put a little tiny bit of the soft black into it. And added some curlies. Now if you're adding curlies and it skips out and you don't, like right there, don't go back and try to trace that in. Just leave it. They're loose. And that's where the sunlight's hitting it and you're not seeing it. That's our story and we're sticking to that. So we've got some curlies in there and we're going to, I want to strengthen the shading. If you can see right now the leaves aren't tucked under enough. So I want to strengthen the shading on the leaves. So I'm going to use that plantation pine and soft black mix and push those back. You see how that darkened it more? So that's plantation pine. And soft black. Not much. Don't need to make much. You're going to be just adding a little bit of shading. So it's just the bottom of everything. Wherever the flower is overlapping, this guy's going to end up getting a double dose of it. Once it's dry, I can go back in there. That changes it. That pushes everything back a bit. That's nice. Do you see what I mean by pushing it back a bit? Now it gives the look, I'll just pull a little of that out. It gives the look that the flower is on top. This leaf is tucked underneath. Anything dark goes back and anything light comes towards us. I'm just going to strengthen up down the vein on a couple of them too. I like that. Nice and soft. Remember, I don't press hard when I shade. I want to keep it, if you're thinking, keep it in your mind, it's a side load. Load on the side load, float. And if you think float, you will shade nice and soft. Think of floating, feather floating, a leaf floating on the water, side load, float. I want the whole float is the color floating across the brush, on that water on your brush. I'm going to strengthen that little spot where I tinted because I can see a bleed there. All right. So you see how everything just kind of pulls together nicely. All right, that's that for now. I'll do it on these ones. What this is going to do is it's going to help to push the leaves in behind so that it gives us a bit more dimension. It's going to help it look like the pansies are on top again, that the leaves are tucked in behind them. And it just strengthens up the shading there. So, and you can add a little in a few spots. So you can see this soft work that I've got around the background on there. I'm going to take my stain and antiquing medium and I'm going to load. So I'm going to turn now and I'm going to come over to these flowers. So I'll put that under the camera there. So I'm going to load my brush in stain antiquing medium. So what this does is help keep our paint sheer, right? So we can have a transparent look. And also what I like about it is that it's going to allow me to wipe it off if I don't like what I'm doing. And always when we're putting on a soft background, people tend, quite often I do this with just a thin down and I float the color on, but it's a terror zone for a lot of the people. So this way, if we use this, it's kind of like a little insurance policy. It helps and it makes you feel better. So, whoops, wrong color. So what I've done here, I've mixed raw umber, 2 parts raw umber to 1 part plantation pine. And I'm going to come in here. My brush is loaded with the stain antiquing medium as my shading medium. And I just nice and softly float in around the flowers. And I'm doing like a pat float. See how I'll just pat that in and soften with my mop. And I'm going to come in behind my bird a little bit too. Not too much. But it's just going to add a nice soft little bit. I'll wash out my brush, reload in the stain antiquing medium, side load into my raw umber plantation pine mix, paint towards my flowers and leaves, and just the gel out. And this adds a nice soft background. so that our flowers and leaves don't appear to be just floating in here. And I just soften up the edges. Blend out some more. And I'm going to come in here. And again, I'm going to soften it out. Now, in between your flowers here, I'm just going to come in here and dab in a little bit just with the corner of my brush. So it just puts in a little bit of a background. I think I could like a little stronger here too. So you see how I can just pat that in there. And again, take my mop and just lightly soften it in there. I'm not really concerned about softening it. Same thing in here. I can darken that a little bit under the bird. So you see how where I haven't got anything there, how it really stands out. So this is quite effective, even though there. And it's not meant to be a complete float around everything. I'm just strengthening it up there. So I'm going to turn my board, and I'm going to repeat and do that over here. To this little batch here, they really can use some oomph around them. And then you see how when I come in here and I just soften with the mop, I can soften those edges as much as I like. And I'm just pouncing with the mop. I'm not brushing with the mop. So I'm just going to tap my way around. So I'm going to add a little bit of what we're going to call faux background leaves. So I'm going to take this stain antiquing medium, pick up my mixture of plantation pine and raw umber, and I'm just going to nice and softly put in a leaf, and I blot with my finger. So you just press, pull in, just something to imply that there's leaves coming out, and I just blot with my finger. The harder you press, when you put your brush, I guess it would be good to stay under the camera. Put my brush down, press, blot with my finger. See how when I blot with my finger, they become very faint? These are, we also call them shadow leaves. So I just give them a, but it just kind of fills in and it pulls your eyes. I always like how it pulls your eye away from your picture. So it takes your eyes and brings them around. So I'll do a few more over here. Again, so the stain antiquing medium is helping to keep my paint, making you dizzy pulling this around. So the stain antiquing medium is helping to keep my paint sheer and transparent. Got a hair from my mop in there. That'll come out after. But you see, so it depends on how strong it is, whether you want to blot it. I'm kind of liking these ones right now because there's not as much left on my brush. And the thing, my idea here is to basically pull my eye away. So it does do that by pulling those out. These little grooves are tricky to work around. So that looks to be good to me. So the next thing would be to dry it and then to be able to shade around my outer edges. So what we're going to do now is the last thing I'm going to do. I'm going to use a nice big brush. You can use a 3/4 or a 1 inch. I've got a nice 1 inch here. And I'm going to side load into raw umber. Blend really well on your palette. Really well on your palette. And I'm going to start, okay, it's hard because this board is quite big. Okay, so I'm going to start and I'm going to go all the way along my outer edge. Nice and soft. And I'll just soften with the edge with my mop. Nice and blended really well. So when I end in an area like that, I'll start from somewhere else and come into it. So I join up to it. Nice and soft. The whole thing, I'm not pressing hard. I did my hard pressing and when I blended on my palette. So I'm just shading all the way around. Again, this is going to pull my eyes back into my painting. I always like to shade around my outer edges. I'll do it once and then I'll go back and I'll strengthen it up again. But I'll allow it to dry really well in between. So you see how that just brings my eyes back into my painting. So again, I start here, I'll come back into the area. And I could have a bigger mop here for this job. And that's good for now. I'll just let this dry up good and I'll come back and shade it a second time. Usually once I've shaded a second time, then I can go to, I'm happy with it, and I'll go to my outer edges. So anyways, there we go. That's it.